Prime Minister Mark Carney just shook hands with the Emir of Qatar in Doha, sealing a partnership that fundamentally rewrites the North American power structure. On the surface, this looks like a standard diplomatic visit, polite trade agreements and a symphony orchestra playing in the background. But make no mistake, this is the moment Canada stopped waiting for the United States to get its act together. While the mainstream media is distracted by the cultural fluff pieces, the real signal is actually coming from the capital flows. Canada is pivoting, and for the first time in a century, the United States isn't the pivot point. To understand why a trade deal between a maple syrup producer and a desert gas giant matters to your wallet, we have to look at the silent crisis paralyzing Ottawa. For decades, Canada has been the polite upstairs neighbor. They produce the energy, the minerals, and the raw materials, and they sell almost all of it to us, the United States, at a discount. Geography dictates that Canada flows south, or at least it used to. Enter Mark Carney. He is not just a politician, he is a central banker. He ran the Bank of Canada, he ran the Bank of England. He looks at the world through the ruthless calculus of capital efficiency, and what he sees in 2026 is a United States that is increasingly unreliable. We blocked Keystone XL, we delayed cross-border grids, and we turned trade into a political weapon. So Carney did the math. Canada has the resources, but they lack the capital to develop them rapidly, and the infrastructure to send them anywhere but the US. Enter Qatar. Qatar is a geopolitical anomaly, a tiny peninsula sitting on a bubble of natural gas with too much cash and a desperate need to diversify. They need safe harbors for their wealth. What happened in Doha wasn't just a handshake, it was a massive capital injection. Carney is securing Qatari sovereign wealth funding to build out the infrastructure that America refused to finance. We are talking about LNG terminals on the East Coast, deep-water ports, and critical mineral processing facilities that bypass American supply chains. Let's look at the energy component, because this is where the domino effect begins. For the last 15 years, the shale revolution made the United States the energy kingpin. We became complacent. We assumed Canada had nowhere else to go. But the global energy market is starving for reliable power. Canada has it, but they couldn't get it to the coast. Qatari investment changes that physics. If Qatar funds the liquefaction plants in Nova Scotia or British Columbia, suddenly Canadian gas isn't flowing south into American pipelines to keep our prices low. It is being loaded onto Qatari-owned tankers and shipped directly to Tokyo, Berlin, and Mumbai. Think about what that does to the North American energy fortress. For decades, we've enjoyed a discount on energy because the market was a closed loop. If Canada plugs directly into the global market with Qatari capital, that discount vanishes. Your heating bill in Minnesota is no longer competing with North Dakota prices, it is competing with global prices. But the energy trade is just the start. The deeper play here is about the Arctic. We often forget that Canada is an Arctic superpower on paper, but a minor power in practice. They have the land, but not the icebreakers or the ports to enforce sovereignty. Russia does, China wants to, and the United States has largely ignored it. As the ice melts, the Northwest Passage becomes the most valuable shipping lane on Earth. Who controls the ports along that route controls the trade of the next century. If the US won't pay to build those ports, and Canada can't afford to do it alone, Qatari money becomes the only game in town. Imagine a scenario 5 years from now where the port logistics of the Canadian Arctic are managed by firms backed by Doha. Qatar talks to everyone. They hedge their bets. Do we really want the logistics hub of the North American Arctic controlled by a neutral party? This brings us to the CanCon element, the cultural mention in the press releases. Why does a geopolitical strategist care about a Canadian orchestra in Doha? Because soft power greases the skids for hard power. Carney is rebranding the country. To the rest of the world, Canada was just America Light, safe, boring, attached to Washington. Carney is marketing Canada as the adult in the room, the stable partner. He is using the Canada brand to wash the money. It normalizes the relationship. It makes Qatari investment feel like a partnership between friends rather than a purchase of strategic assets. But this is where the story gets darker. We have to talk about the minerals. The war of the future is about the metals that make the digital world function. Cobalt, lithium, nickel. Canada has them. The US needs them. We assumed that when push comes to shove, Canada would reserve those resources for us. But capital doesn't have a flag. If Qatari investment firms start buying up controlling stakes in the junior mining companies in Ontario and Quebec, where do those minerals go? Mark Carney knows that the US is paralyzed by by bureaucracy. To open a mine in the US takes 10 years of permitting. In Canada, it's faster, but you need cash up front. Qatar provides the cash. If they own the equity, they dictate the contracts. We could wake up in 2028 and find that the nickel needed for Ford and GM batteries is under contract to a supply chain that routes through Doha, or is sold to the highest bidder on the open market. This is the price of American distraction. While we have been arguing over culture wars, a former central banker has been quietly dismantling the unpolar economic structure of North America. Carney sees a United States that is becoming more protectionist, so he acted. You cannot blame a country for pursuing its own national interest, but you have to recognize when that interest diverges from yours. This partnership signals that the post-1945 order, where North America was a single economic bloc led by Washington, is over. It is now a multipolar continent. So what happens in the next 6 months? Watch the regulatory filings, watch the flow of heavy equipment to Canada's east coast, watch for announcements of new LNG trains that have no American partners. We will see Canadian pension funds teaming up with the Qatari Investment Authority, becoming a third pole of capital, independent of Wall Street. For the average American, the impact will be slow and then sudden. Slightly higher gas prices, delays in getting electronics, Canada voting differently at the UN. But the psychological shift is what matters. We are used to Canada being the background character in the American movie. Mark Carney just rewrote the script. He made Canada the protagonist of its own story, and in that story, the United States is just another neighbor. The status quo didn't die with a bang, it died with a handshake in Doha. We built walls to keep the rivals out, but we never thought to look at who was buying the house next door. And now, the deed has been transferred.